Hey, welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Think Thursday is all about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. We're talking neuroscience. We're talking behavior change. We are talking about your mindset. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Well, hello and welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist. You know, by this point in January, the conversation around New Year's resolutions usually starts to shift. The excitement of January 1st has definitely worn off, and life has settled back into its normal rhythm. We talked a little bit about that last week. And for a lot of people, this is the moment when behavior change starts to feel less inspiring and more complicated. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been unpacking why that happens. We talked about the fresh start effect on January 1st and why it feels so powerful psychologically, even though the brain doesn't actually reset overnight. And last week, we dug into the neuroscience of follow-through and looking at why motivation fades and what the brain actually needs instead if change is going to be sustainable. And today we're going to go even one layer deeper, because by mid-January, many people are still doing the behavior, they're taking the action, but internally they are beginning to question themselves. You might be thinking, this doesn't really feel like me yet. This feels a little awkward. I don't really know that this is going to last. I don't think I can do this forever. And that discomfort often gets misinterpreted as a sign that something's not working. But there's a very real neurological reason that this phase feels the way that it does. And I want to introduce a term to you. It's called identity lag. And understanding it can be the difference between quietly giving up and just calmly staying the course. So let's talk about identity lag. Identity lag is the space between what you're doing and what you believe about yourself. And we talk a lot about identity-based behavior change being the goal, because that's how sustainable change lasts. But behavior changes first, and identity updates later. That order matters. We often assume confidence should come first. We want to feel like it's going to work. And that once we start acting differently, we'll immediately feel aligned, certain, and grounded in this new identity. But the brain, of course, does not work that way. From a neuroscience perspective, identity lives in self-referential and narrative networks, including parts of that beautiful default mode network. And these systems are designed to be stable because stability signals safety to the brain. So when behavior changes faster than identity, the brain doesn't rush to rewrite the story of who you are. The narrative and the stories that you've been believing for a long time are still there. Instead, the brain pauses, it watches, and it continues to gather information. That watchful phase is what identity lag feels like. It's not resistance, it's not failure, it's the brain actually doing some quality control. And we've talked before on the podcast about on Think Thursday, and probably on the big podcast too, about a concept from psychology and it's called cognitive dissonance. And it's that tension that shows up when what you're doing doesn't yet match what you believe about yourself. During identity lag, it is exactly what is happening. Your brain is experiencing a lot of cognitive dissonance. Your behavior has changed, and your internal story about who you are has not caught up yet. And so this mismatch, right, creates that feeling of cognitive dissonance. And dissonance means friction, or, it's not in harmony. And the brain really does not like that unresolved tension. So when cognitive dissonance appears, the brain looks for the fastest way to make things feel consistent again. And there are really two options. One option is to change the behavior and return to the old identity. That resolves discomfort quickly, right? Familiarity returns and tension drops. It's not the best way. It's certainly not the way to create change. The other option is to stay with the new behavior long enough for identity to update. That second option feels awkward and uncertain at first, but it's how real change actually happens. This is why thoughts often show up right in the middle of progress. This doesn't feel right. I don't know if this is really me. I was probably overestimating my ability. Those thoughts are warnings. They are signs that the brain is deciding whether this new behavior is worth incorporating into who you are. And here's a paradox that surprises a lot of people. Self-doubt often peaks after consistency begins, not before. That's because identity change introduces uncertainty. Old patterns, even when they are unhelpful, are familiar. And again, familiarity, stability, signals safety to the brain. New behaviors, even healthy ones, are unproven. From an evolutionary perspective, the brain prioritizes predictability. When predictability is disrupted, the brain asks questions. That questioning shows up as doubt. And this is also why imposter syndrome appears during growth. The brain hasn't updated its internal model yet, so it flags the situation as uncertain. And many people interpret that discomfort as a signal to stop. But neurologically, identity lag is not a red flag. It's a transition phase. Behavior is leading, identity is following. Identity does not change through declarations, through thoughts, through, saying something ahead of time, right? That's why we talk about bridge thoughts, and avoiding cognitive dissonance with our thinking. Identity changes through evidence accumulation. Each repetition tells the brain this wasn't a fluke. And research on learning and neuroplasticity shows that identity updates only after behavior is repeated across time and context. The brain needs to observe. Can this happen on busy days? Can this happen when emotions are high? Can this happen when motivation is low? Only then does identity begin to soften and adjust. And this is why forcing confidence early often backfires. When identity claims outpace evidence, the brain pushes back even harder. A more supportive approach to let behavior quietly build the case is, instead of saying, I am someone who does this thing, or this is who I am now, you might say, this is something I'm practicing. One of my favorite phrases, and people have heard me say it often, I am learning to become someone who, and then fill in the blank. For alcohol minimalists, I am learning to become someone who desires alcohol less. That language aligns with how the brain actually learns, and it feels very real. Every moment it feels real. And it helps continue to lessen cognitive dissonance. Here's the part that matters most. Over time, research shows that behavior is often what resolves cognitive dissonance, not beliefs. I want you to hear me say that again. Over time, research shows that behavior is often what resolves cognitive dissonance, not beliefs. When behavior stays consistent, identity eventually follows. That's why you don't have to convince yourself. You just have to keep showing up. Each repetition gives the brain more data. Each follow-through moment reduces uncertainty. Each small win makes the new behavior feel less risky. This is how the brain updates its story of who you are. Not through declarations, not through motivation, through evidence. So, how do you move through this phase without undoing progress? Here are a few brain-aligned anchors. Separate behavior from belief. You don't need to feel confident for behavior to work. Treat doubt as information, not instruction. Doubt means the brain is evaluating, not rejecting. Look for evidence, not feelings. Ask what you've done, not how convinced you feel. Avoid premature labels. You don't need to name a new identity yet. And normalize the lag. This phase is expected. You are not behind. You are right where you're supposed to be. Feeling unfamiliar is not the same as being misaligned. So here's the takeaway for this Thursday, for this Think Thursday. If you're doing things differently, but you don't quite believe it yet, you're fine. Your behavior is leading and your identity is catching up. That space in between is not failure. It's learning. You don't need to rush confidence. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to declare a new identity before your brain is ready. Keep gathering evidence. Keep repeating what's working. Let your brain update the story in its own time. Next week, we are going to talk about what happens when things start to feel quieter, calmer, and even a little boring, and why that phase is actually a sign of progress. That's all I have for you today, my friends. Until next time, choose peace, and I will see you on Monday.